Greetings and welcome to Tactical Inc., your portal to the captivating realm of all things Lorcana. I'm Alex.
And I'm Bradley. Ursula's Return released 2 new starter decks, an Amber Amethyst deck that highlights the power of Madrigals, and the Steel Sapphire deck that focuses on heroes. And with these starter decks, we wanted to increase the power of them using a budget of $40 to help you improve your decks to make them more consistent and even more competitive.
With that $40, we've used TCG Player's market price. We're recording this at the beginning of June, so the prices may change by the time that this video is released. However, it should still be somewhere around that $40 mark, give or take, by the end of it all.
So first of all, let's talk about the 2 starter decks released with Ursula's Return, and what their focus is straight out of the box. Starting with the Madrigal Amber Amethyst deck. And right out of the box, this deck is all about getting your characters out early and gaining lore as fast as possible. In the mid-game, you want to be healing your characters to keep gaining you lore. And then, finally at the late game, it focuses on your higher Madrigals to finish off the game.
The next deck is the Hero Sapphire Steel deck. Out of the box, this deck really wants to focus on a lot of your heroes to gain you lore through some powerful options. There's also some good control options in here, such as Smash, maybe even Imperial Bow, and one that highlights your heroes, which is the song One Last Hope.
So let's dig a little deeper. Let's point out key cards in each deck that will survive the final cut after we upgrade it. Starting with our Amber Amethyst Madrigal deck, the biggest card to help this deck win out of the box is Mirabelle Madrigal, Gift of the Family. She's all about giving your other Madrigals more lore. And since this deck already comes with 23 Madrigals in the deck, she will be powering up your characters immensely. Another card to really help push your lore up to 20 is Isabella Madrigal, Golden Child. She can give you a lot of lore all at once, and it's hard to remove due to her having evasive. One thing to note, she does not work well with Mirabelle Madrigal, Gift of the Family, due to her effect not allowing you to quest with other characters if she quests herself. However, she's a great alternative to win condition if you don't draw Mirabelle. And the third most impactful card is Julieta Madrigal. This is the little Rapunzel gifted with healing, if you will, but comes out a turn earlier, giving you card draw, and she is a Madrigal, adding to Mirabelle's impact in the deck.
Now let's take a look at the key cards in our second deck, the Steel Sapphire Hero deck. And obviously, with this being a deck focused around heroes, some of our best cards are going to be the ones that bolster our gameplay based on heroes being in the game. Some of those are Phil No Nonsense Instructor, who whenever you play a hero character you gain 1 lore, as well as Anna Braving the Storm, who's a pretty great 2-ink character with adding more lore if you have other heroes in play. And finally, Anna True-Hearted, who gives all your other hero characters an additional lore whenever she quests. So we'll look to keep some of these cards in our game plan and really try to synergize around the heroes going forward.
So when looking at these decks, we need to add cards to make them improve without changing the goal of the deck.
As a reminder, we're going to keep this within our budget of $40 for each deck to improve them. So let's look at some cards here in the first deck, the Madrigal family. So Bradley, you're the one that really dove into this deck to make it better. What did you choose to add here?
Yeah, and the first thing I did was focus on the Madrigal family. First by adding 3 more copies of Mirabelle, Gift of the Family, for a total of 60 cents. She is one of the key cards to this deck, so having a full playset of her is a no-brainer. And we're also going to add 1 more Isabella Golden Child as well, for 44 cents. We won't need 4 copies of her since she doesn't play well with Mirabelle, but she can be that alternative if you don't have enough Madrigals on the field or if you don't have Mirabelle. We are going to add 2 more copies of Dolores Easy Listener for a total of 48 cents, since her effect allows you to almost always draw a card. And if she doesn't, she still has a great stat line and helps you close in on the win with 2 lore. We're also going to add 2 more copies of Camilo Madrigal Prankster for 18 cents. He is a versatile card to help you remove threats or gain more lore. And next we're going to add 2 more copies of Julieta Madrigal, Excellent Cook, for 32 cents. She is one of the key cards we talked about earlier to draw into your Madrigals so you can fill the board for Mirabelle. Next we're going to add 4 copies of Alma Madrigal, Family Matriarch, for $1.24. Alma can help you get your Madrigals to the top of your deck so you can be ready to play them next turn. But she's also great for the next card we are going to talk about. And this leads us into the deck's secondary game plan, Top Deck Manipulation. And the main card that goes into both game plans, both Madrigal and Top Deck Manipulation, is Bruno Madrigal, Undetected Uncle. We will add 4 copies of him for $4.36. He is a Madrigal which works well with Mirabelle, but also can work well with cards like Alma, that can place cards on the top of your deck and you know exactly who it is. So when you activate Bruno's effect, you can stack up the lore. To help manipulate the top cards of your deck, we are going to run 4 copies of the Bosses on a Roll for $1.40. This card leads right into that game plan to keep Bruno activating his effect for the next few turns, gaining new lore. We also have added 2 copies of Ursula's Cauldron and 2 copies of Sorcerer's Hat for $1.26. Additionally, we've added 4 copies of Merlin Squirrel for 16 cents. Each of these cards can tell you the top card of your deck to activate Bruno and gain more lore. And these are the core cards of the deck, but we've also added a few removal options and draw options to help the deck slow down your opponent's threats and help you gain card advantage. We've added removal characters that love the challenge with 3 Madam Mim Fox for $13.23, 3 Madam Mim Snakes for 57 cents, and 3 Rafiki Mystical Fighters for $4.50. Fox and Snake can return cards like your Julieta to activate her effect over and over again. For card draw, we added 4 Magic Broom and Luminary Keepers for 52 cents and 3 Merlin Rabbits for $5.70. Finally, we added 3 copies of the Goat, that being Merlin Goat, for 69 cents to help us reach that goal of getting 20 lore quicker. All in all, this brings our total to $35.65.
So now that everything's been added, we do have a lot of leftovers to be cut out. So what all have you chosen that you want to take out after adding all these extra cards?
I decided to remove a bunch of Madrigals since we're adding so much as well. We removed 3 copies of Mirabelle Prophecy Finder, 2 copies of Felix Madrigal, 3 copies of Antonio Madrigal, 2 copies of Luisa Madrigal, 1 copy of Peppa Madrigal, and 1 copy of Bruno Madrigal out of the Shadows. We are still running 29 Madrigals in this deck, and we believe this is cutting the excess to help this deck run alternative ways of winning, running more card advantage, and finally, running more ways to deal with opponents' threats, something that this deck struggled with. We'll be removing most of the songs in this deck, starting with 2 copies of Poor Unfortunate Souls, both copies of Heal What Has Been Hurt, both copies of Lost in the Woods, and 1 copy of Look at This Family. This deck is focusing more on gaining lore and setting up for Mirabelle to pop off, so many of these songs can slow down the deck. And since we are hardly running any songs in this deck, let's kick out both copies of Sebastian and 1 copy of Ariel Singing Mermaid. We'll be removing both copies of Healing Glow as well, since we won't be focusing on healing, other than to draw cards with Julieta. We are also removing those copies of the location Casa Madrigal. I think the cost is too much to move a character to this location and just gain 1 lore. If the effect would stack to having multiple characters there, it'd be a no-brainer. However, it's not, and so this card is a pass. We are also removing 3 Stitch Alien Dancers, 3 Elsa Queen Regents, and 2 copies of the Queen Hateful Rival. These are all just vanilla cards that only have 1 lore. Nothing helping your game plan here, so these are easy scratches. We're also going to remove both copies of TikTok Ever-Present Pursuer. He does have Evasive with 4 Strength, which can remove several evasive characters in the game. However, he comes out on turn 6, after most evasive have already done significant damage. Not only that, he only quests for 1 lore. We're also going to kick out both copies of Mickey Mouse Leader of the Band and both copies of Rolly, due to support just not being that great of a mechanic in this deck especially. Lastly, we're removing 3 copies of Marshmallow, Terrifying Snowman, 3 copies of Prince Eric's Seafaring Prince, and 2 copies of Hey Hey. Each of these cards have 1 lore, and for the most part, aren't helping with the game plan.
So all in all, taking a look at this, we have removed 49 cards from the deck. However, there were several Madrigals that were added to the deck, so the theme of Madrigals was kept intact in the end. So Bradley, after testing it, how do you feel like this deck runs?
So, I tried a few iterations of this deck, including enhancing the Singer cards that were already in it, or even throwing bodyguards, and I was ready to pull the trigger on the bodyguard part until testing, but the Madrigals that made up most of the deck and its support was not cutting it. This has been one of the harder decks for me to really improve and make consistent without cutting so much from it. So I stuck with the goal. Keep it Madrigal, surrounding the key cards being Mirabelle, Isabella, and Julieta, improve it with the $40, and adding 2 more key cards, Alma Madrigal and Bruno, Undetected Uncle. And it works. This deck really sets up early game by drawing cards with your magic brooms, removes threats using Madam Nim, Snake, and Fox, and then gets into the meat of the deck with your Madrigals and your top deck manipulation cards to begin gaining lore fast. And that's what this deck can do. It can gain large amounts of lore out of nowhere, completely surprising your opponent to overwhelm them with a win. It does have a few weaknesses, and the big one is board wipes, and decks that can just gain lore faster than you. But it's very consistent, and surprisingly, it can be very challenging to play against. Now, if you want to stick to using more of the cards that came in the starter deck, I would recommend removing this top deck manipulation cards and using other Madrigals such as Luisa Madrigal to help remove some of the threats on the board. However, in my opinion, the Madrigals we removed, we just believe they are not very good. But enough of my deck now. Let's go to the deck you really changed up, the Hero Sapphire Steel deck. So Alex, what did you add to your deck?
Yeah, so with this Sapphire Steel deck, I do want to keep the theme of heroes going strong. However, I can see a lot of cheap, budget-friendly options that can make it very similar to competitive meta decks. And one of the first things to start out with that Sapphire Steel can excel at is card draw. So, to start out, let's add, in my opinion, what may be the very best or one of the best card draw engines in the entire game. And that is featuring the items Popsicle and Fortisphere. We're gonna get 4 copies of each of these. Popsicle is 23 cents, and Fortisphere is 19 cents. These are both 1 ink items that immediately draw you a card. Then let's add in 4 copies of Hiram Flaversham for $1.86 each. He's a 4 ink character that's gonna come in and banish either of these cheap items to draw us an additional 2 cards. Continuing with this item card draw, we're gonna add in 4 copies of Scuttle, Expert on Humans. He's a 2 ink character that will dig deeper into your deck to find you an item and put it into your hand. We want a really good win condition, so let's bring in 4 copies of Aerial Treasure Collector for $1.14 each. She's a great option with all these items that we have. She has ward, and honestly, she can just do so much for you. So she's a no-brainer here. And with Aerial, I feel like one of the most important cards in the entire game that can be so powerful is a legendary card that I'd like to add into the deck here. It is very expensive, but I feel like it's well worth it. And that is Lucky Dime for $11.29. Well, I'm only going to add 1 copy of this card, and really, I think that you would want to have 2, so if you want to grab another later on, I would definitely advise it. But for now, 1 copy can do the trick. We also want some ink acceleration to get Aerial Treasure Collector out faster, as well as everything else that you have. Mickey Mouse Detective is already a really good one, but let's add a little bit more. Normally, people would go with Fishbone Quill to support this item theme. However, Fishbone Quill is a little bit expensive, so I'm going to opt for Great Stone Dragon instead. This may be a little bit slower, but it still can be very powerful once on the board. Great Stone Dragon is 12 cents each, and we're going to get 4 copies of it. And that makes up the majority of what our goal is going to be with the deck. Playing items to draw you lots of cards, and then using them to gain lots of lore with Aerial in the end. However, we still have this hero theme in here as well, which I feel like can still synergize with it. So let's continue it by adding 3 more copies of Phil No Nonsense Instructor because he's the best hero support card that we have. I'm also going to add another hero that I feel like could work really well if you're bringing a lot of heroes in, who is Aurora Dreaming Guardian. She gives all of your other characters ward, she is a hero, and she can shift onto your cheaper Aurora characters. Moving on from here, I'd like to look into some control options that we need to focus on. And in the current metagame, getting rid of some small threats in this current meta like Diablo Devoted Herald and Flynn Rider Frenemy, or some of the other evasive characters that can cause you lots of problems, it can be important to have some damage tools to deal with them. So let's bring in 4 copies of Baboom for 16 cents each. And something even more important, which is Grab Your Swords. We'll get 3 copies of this for $1.97 each. We'll also get 3 copies of Let the Storm Rage On for 32 cents each. I'll add 2 copies of Let It Go to deal with some of those bigger threats that you'll see in the late game for $1.07 each. And the last card that I want to add to this deck is a little bit different, but it does synergize really well, and that is that I'm going to add 1 more copy of One Last Hope for 21 cents. So all in all, we've added 44 cards, and our total came out to $38.95.
Alright, so 44 cards. That's a lot there. So we got to remove 44. So Alex, what did you choose to be removed from this deck?
So let's start out by scrapping some of the vanilla cards that aren't even heroes. So some of those are the Transformed Chef, Castle Stove, Flounder, Collector's Companion, Pascal, Inquisitive Pet, and Ling, Imperial Soldier. Let's also get rid of a few heroes that really aren't doing much for us. A few of those include Basil of Baker Street, Aurora Regal Princess. Now with Aurora, I just don't like this one because she has bad stats and can be easily taken out. I care a little bit more about the Aurora Tranquil Princess because she does have ward, so she can stick around to shift onto our Dreaming Guardian. Some more of the heroes that we're going to remove are Prince Philip, Gallant Defender, Rapunzel, Appreciative Artist, Sisu, Wise Friend, Mulan, Armored Fighter, Mickey Mouse, Standard Bearer, Hercules, Beloved Hero, Li Shang, Imperial Captain, Kida, Royal Warrior, Ariel, Determined Mermaid, and Aladdin, Resolute Swordsman. Since we have so much card draw already, I really don't need the song Dig a Little Deeper, so we're going to get rid of those. And we also don't really need the song Seldom They All Seem. There's just so many other better options to get rid of your opponent's characters. Speaking of which, the item Imperial Bow does work with heroes. However, I just don't see this as a very good way to get rid of characters even with your heroes, so I'm taking it out as well. Finally, the last cards that I'm going to remove are the 3 copies of the location Thebes. This location is interesting to me, however there's just a lot of better things to me that could be going for this deck, and it doesn't fit in with our item theme.
Alright, so that's a lot of cards. So Alex, tell us, how does it run?
Now, this deck is a lot of fun, and it can be pretty competitive. It runs very similar to the way that you'd see the competitive versions run, just with some synergy revolving around all these heroes that you have, for a little bit of a surprise that your opponents wouldn't normally be seeing. I really like Phil and the surprise lore that he can add into the game plan, and he can be really effective at times if your opponents don't deal with him quickly. There are some easy improvements that you can make to this deck if you want to spend just a little bit more. One thing that I had mentioned is adding another copy of Lucky Dime so that you can find it easier. It really can win the game fast once you have Ariel on the field. And a couple other cards that could be amazing improvements to your deck are Tinkerbell, Giant Fairy for some more damage control, and Tamatoa, So Shiny, for another huge win condition besides just Ariel. You could obviously trade out Great Stone Dragon for Fishbone Quill. Fishbone Quill, in my opinion, is the better ramp option because it's faster and it can put some of your uninkable cards into your Inkwell, but the Great Stone Dragon does work pretty well. One last thing I would mention is that I haven't added any item removal here, so if you wanted to add Benja, Guardian of the Dragon Gem, or Beast Hard-Headed, or Rise of the Titans, all of those would be very good choices to put in here as well.
Well, that's all for today. What have you done to improve these starter decks? Let us know in the comments below.
Be sure to follow us on social media to keep up to date on the latest Tactical Ink news. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you can tune in every week for a new episode of Tactical Ink.
See you next week.